One of the earliest forms of motor racing is dirt track racing. In the 1900s and teens and 20s, there wasn't much but dirt tracks and dirt roads to race on. So that's where the cars grew and that's where the sports grew. As a matter of fact, later on, NASCAR actually started off on dirt tracks, and I mean, for many different reasons, one of which was, guys who were running illegal booze were really good drivers and they started racing each other. In the 1920s, dirt track racing finally became more organized, and it wasn't just a bunch of kids getting together, something being held at a county fair. It started to become a little more organized. There was still jalopy racing though, and jalopy racing was basically a sport where anybody could go grab a car, lighten it up a bit, do a few tricks, and go out racing. And that was popular with teenagers and guys in their 20s. And it went on and it grew and it developed. So in the 1920s and 30s you had that. You also had things right up to Grand Prix racing being done on dirt tracks. So in the late 30s, what became popular on dirt tracks was cars that were, easily sourced. And easily sourced cars were quite often Fords and Chevrolets. Of course, with Fords, you had Model Ts and Model As. And they became the predominant force on tracks. You did see other cars getting there, but I mean, parts and everything were easier. And also, one of the things that really got Ford heavily involved in dirt track racing was the creation of the V8. A lot of cars ran sixes, Chevy was running sixes, and there was 4 cylinders. Only big cars had V8s, Cadillacs and Lincolns and things like that. Of course, they also had V12s. But the V8 as an everyman's car was really Ford's invention. And this is that V8. I mean, it is a magnificent part of engineering. Now, this one is actually from the 1950s, or actually late 40s, sorry, and it came out of Mercury. But this car, a 1932 Ford, could have and probably did come with a V8 in it. There were 6s that Ford was putting in, and there were actually 4s that they put in, but they didn't call those the V8, of course. One of the great forces in dirt track racing in the 1930s, 40s, and into the 50s was Ford. And the reason for that was the V8. In 1932, Ford introduced an everyman's V8. Before that time, V8s were more often found in luxury cars and that kind of thing. Now, the ordinary guy could have one. And a 32 Ford came with its own V8, which made them very popular and actually pretty fast cars. Here we have a 1932 Ford that was actually a dirt race car. It was raced in the late 30s, 40s, and into the 50s in northern Mexico, southern California. It has a great history, which we'll get into in a little while. But more importantly right now, it's got a V8 in it. Now, this V8 is not an early V8. It's actually out of a 1949 Mercury, but the layout of the engine is basically the same with some alterations. You can get at the distributor on this, whereas the early V8s had the distributor underneath the fan on the front of the motor. You had to take the damn car apart to get at it. But the V8 made the cars very competitive. 6s in Chevys and other car makes really couldn't match the V8s. The Fords became popular, and what really became popular was jalopy racing. Cars like this were literally called jalopies in that period, and it became a widespread sport. In the 1940s and 50s, jalopy racing was one of the biggest sports in America. So of course, jalopy racing evolved into dirt track racing, and that is still with us. I mean, dirt track racers are either closed fender or open fender, and those are held all over the United States and other parts of the world for that matter. The cars these days are not this. They're highly refined, fire-breathing monsters with huge amounts of horsepower and everything. But the skills are the same. As a matter of fact, when you look at old archival footage of cars like this, running at high speeds on dirt tracks with no safety apparel, no roll bars, the guys weren't strapped in, you start to realize how, either brave or stupid these young guys were, because it was a really dangerous thing to do in those days. One of the great things was almost anybody could get involved with this. It didn't take a whole bunch of money to go out and get yourself an old Model A or a Model T or even a 32 or 34, 35 Ford. Cut it all down, strip the interior out, get rid of every panel you didn't need to go racing, lighten the car up, go out on a Sunday afternoon and be a race car driver. Racing cars on dirt tracks has been with us a long time. As a matter of fact, one of the really fun things about dirt track racing is looking at the historical footage of these things. And you can see Kids in the 1930s and kids in the 1940s and 50s racing cars like this on little tiny tracks and a whole bunch of cars at once going as fast as they possibly could. You can see just how dangerous it was because these cars had no safety equipment, no seat belts, no roll cages. It was just young guys being just as nuts as young guys are. You may have seen this 32 Ford in other videos that we've done. The neat thing about this is it was actually a dirt track racer in the 1930s, 40s, and into the 50s. It was originally purchased as a brand new car by a past president of Mexico, and he passed it on to his son, who turned it into a dirt track racer. It is a really good example of what a dirt track racer was. They weren't sophisticated. They were lightened as much as possible. Generally, the interiors were stripped out. Now, somebody has put a full interior back in this, but when this car was racing, I'm sure all it had was a single seat. You took the fenders and everything off. Any panels you didn't need, the side panels on the engine. It wasn't just to lighten the car, it was to aid in access to the mechanical bits you may need to fix in the middle of a race.
The call has come for eliminations. Some cars are still in trouble, and the pits are a beehive of activity as mechanics try their best to meet the deadline, which may be only minutes away. These experienced hands can tear down an engine, rebuild it in a matter of minutes. If necessary, they'll replace an entire engine. Well, after all, they usually have at least an hour to change engines, and they get lots of practice racing every weekend.
In the 1960s, 70s, I think it probably disappeared. It re-emerged in the 2000s, and at that time it was purchased by an American gentleman who prepared it and used it in the Great Race. In I think 2007, 2008, somewhere around there. And it still bears the scars of that. These cars were covered in advertising. Now the neat thing is, this car's got a lot of its original advertising on it in Spanish, which I think is interesting. A lot of it's faded. You can see the cracking in the paint actually runs through the ads, so you sort of know they've been there a long time. And you can even see where it had stickers to the Great Race, where it's pulled the paint off, says greatrace.com right here. Sort of a shame, but then again, maybe not, because it is part of the car's history. This car has seen its racing days behind it, or has it? Probably not, because you know what? I got a racing car. Well, Janice has a racing car. I should put that out there. It is Janice's car, not mine. Will it race again? Well, I think it may, because one of the things I've always wanted to do, sort of on my bucket list, is Trog, which is the Race of Gentlemen. It's held in New Jersey. It's run on a beach. Has some really interesting rules in that I believe you can't have any parts on a car made after, I think, 1952, and you can't have a car that's made, I think, after 1938 or 1939. This is just a wonderful piece, and it'd be an awful lot of fun to drag race it on an eighth of a mile or quarter mile or whatever they're doing running the thing. So she may indeed race again.
And they don't always go straight. Watch it. Is he in trouble? He's got to hold it straight, for if he crosses the center line, the car is disqualified from competition.
If you'd like to see more about this hot rod, well, you can check it out on our history of hot rods on our channel. In the meantime, well, stay tuned for oncoming videos. Thank you for tuning in.